I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to a Way Out Big Book study. I think you're muted, Howard.
Sorry, I'm muted. And I too, my name is Howard Eber. I too am an recovered alcoholic and addict, representing the Big Book Comes Alive. Good to be here this evening. How are you, Steve?
Doing well, doing well. Hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. I don't know if anyone wanted in here last week, but you probably figured out quickly that we didn't have a meeting. Um, so last time we can go back that 2 weeks ago, we got into step three and just kind of broke down that each word in step three, like it's just a decision. You had to take action. And then we got into self-will, which I looked at as my unconscious devotion to my social security and sex instinct. Unconscious means I'm not knowing I'm devoting my life to that stuff. I'm just trying to fulfill myself. And we got in the talk about how pride, makes me act a certain way in front of the people. And high self-esteem, I'm better. Low self-esteem, I'm less than. And emotional security is always affected, within that realm. How material, security, I want shelter, and this and that. And we want more stuff, and sex relations, we get involved with the wrong people and so forth. And then ambitions, where our plans, goals, and dreams all get mixed up a little bit. So tonight is, I guess what we could call it would be almost like more about instincts, because with the focus being instincts and collision. Um, I think I'm going to go to the 12 and 12. And if you go to page 44 of 12 and 12, I'll gi- I'll give people who are digging around a little bit to find theirs. Um,
I'll put it up on the screen. So give me a second. I'll get it for you.
okay. And it's actually the last sentence on top of page 44. And so it's only one sentence and you go to the next paragraph. So I
Okay.
have,
Where are you at the bottom of page 43?
I'm at top of 44. So
44 begins with these people often
yeah,
throw to the winds.
I'm skipping down to the where it says the paragraph says, but that is not all the danger, but the sentence above that. It
There we
said,
go.
whenever a human being becomes a battleground for instincts, there is no peace. But that is not all the danger. Every time a person imposes his instincts unreasonably upon others, unhappiness follows. If the pursuit of wealth tramples upon people who happen to be in the way, then anger, jealousy, and revenge are likely to be aroused. If sex runs riot, there's similar uproar. Demands upon other people far often, far too much attention, protection, and love can only invite domination or revulsion in the protectors themselves. Two emotions quite as unhealthy as the demands which evoke them. When an individual's desire for prestige becomes uncontrollable, whenever in the sewing circle or in the international conference table, other people suffer revolt. Now, here's the part I like is this collision of instincts can produce anything from a cold snub to a blazing revel, revel, revulsion, blazing revulsion. In these ways, we are set in conflict not only with ourselves, but others who have instincts too. And when I became aware of instincts, especially after in halfway to my fifth step and afterwards and to today, I always have to remind myself that people have instincts too, and people struggle. So, um, I'm going to read one thing and just to lead into what we're doing tonight, because we're going to get into the actor tonight and stuff. But I'm going to read a poem. It's kind of a short poem, but it's kind of cool. It's by a guy named Charles C. Finn, and it's called "Please Hear what I Am Not." It says, "Don't be fooled by me. Don't be fooled by the face I wear. For I wear a mask, 1,000 masks, masks that I'm afraid to take off. None of them is me. Pretending is my second nature. I give you the impression that I'm secure, that all is sunny, and that confidence is my name and coolness is my game. That I am calm and in command. That I need no one, but don't believe me and don't be fooled. My surface may seem smooth, but my surface is my mask, ever changing, ever concealing. Beneath it lies confusion, fear, loneliness. But I hide this. I don't want anyone to know it. I panic at the thought of my weaknesses being exposed. That's why I frantically create a mask to hide behind, a nonchalant, sophisticated facade to help me pretend, to shield me from the glance of the one that knows. So I play my game, a desperate pretending game, a facade, a parade of masks. My life is a front. I that's a shorter version of that poem, but Charles C. Finn is the guy, and one of I mean, I came across that years ago, but it's like so spot on. And so, Howard, did you want to talk about collision before we get into it, let me read this first where we're at. I think I know where you want to start off from that.
Go ahead.
The first week on page 60, the first requirement, we're in the big book now, page 60, the first requirement be we need to be convinced that any life run self will probably be a success. And that's why I mentioned a minute ago what that self-will is, the devotion to my social security and sexual needs. Um, but look what it says next is the part that stands out. On that basis, that's living on misdirected instincts, we're most always, I would know the word always, in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Howard, you want to comment on that?
Yeah. On in the 12 and 12 that you were reading before, at the end of page 44, it says something really interesting. It says it calls this collision of instincts, he calls it a perverse soul sickness. And he says this perverse soul sickness is not pleasant to look upon. Instincts on rampage balk at investigation, which means these instincts, due to years and a lifetime spent rationalizing and justifying our behavior, they resist investigation. So it's hard to pin them down, and that's exactly what we're going to try and do. And what we have to try and do is pin down the thoughts. What are the thoughts that get us in trouble? We're going to be reading hopefully today, that these thoughts are hundreds of forms of fear and self and so on. And when we make decisions based on self, something happens. And as Steve just mentioned, this is what happens. And I'm going to give you this sequence of events here. It's called thoughts and actions. What is the connection between the thoughts and the actions? The action of drinking and drugging, for example, that's what we want to try and change. And we've already read that our life is where we in on page 60, that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So a life run on self-will means our decisions are made based on self. What's in it for me? What do I get out of it? Why should I do it? Me, me, me. The AA opera. Me, me, me. Everything is me, me, me. Me at the center of every decision. And when I make a decision based on that, what happens? As we've just read, Steve mentioned, we are in collision with something or somebody. We collide with the forces with which we are in conflict, and we will collide and we will be in conflict, because the problem with self-will is everyone's got it. I've got my book, you've got your book, and they don't match up. So when I try and force my will on you or at a given situation, something happens. I collide with those forces. I'm in conflict mentally, spiritually, and physically. And so, in a sense, I step on your toes. One of those toes gets sensitized and reacts. I step on your toes, which means we collide. And what happens? you push back, right? If I step on your toe and I stand on that toe, you're going to shove me off. Get off my foot. So you're going to retaliate and push me back. Then what happens? Well, I'm entitled to a little pushback also. So I retaliate. I get angry. I get fearful. I act in a harmful manner. In other words, I get resentful. And when I'm resentful, I get high and I drink. And I know that about myself. So if the action of drinking and drugging is what I'm trying to eliminate from my life, I have to get down to the thoughts that set this whole chain of motion in event in action, because all action is born in thought. I know there are some people who say I can act my way into good thinking. Sorry, that's not the case. Because even when you say I can act my way into good thinking, that started with a thought. It all starts with a thought. I can't reach over and pick up a pen without my brain telling my arm to tell my hand to tell my fingers to commit to the action of picking up the pen. So, the reason why these inventories are so important is that we're going to get down to what are those thoughts that set this all in motion, those self-centered thoughts. So for now, that's where I'm going to leave it, and we'll come back to that later. Steve?
All right. I love that. So we'll get back to the book. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. I love this part because
Yeah.
I think of a propeller, right? What is a propeller? It spins and movement, which enables to push, something forward. So on a boat, the propeller is attached to it, and the captain steers the boat, not the propeller. But the driving force of the boat is the propeller. It gives the boat the power it needs. But there are some that are unaware that it's the power that makes the boat plow through the water at great speed. Why? Because they cannot see it. It's the driver. It's under the water. It's beneath the water. They can't see it. It's hidden, tucked away, tucked away. You know, and the thing is our driving forces are also hidden and tucked away. What's the driving force to your life? What's pushing you forward? That's the questions. Most never know because what's pushing them forward is it's hidden. And we're unaware that it's these misdirected instincts that make us plow through our lives at great speed, living by self-propulsion. And the person doesn't even know it. I wouldn't expect them to know it. And living on self-propulsion fails in its attempts to create happiness. And I thought happiness was stuff I always got, not something that was inside of me, but how can you find it if it's buried, right? And instincts create the exact opposite. It's called chaos rather than peace, anger rather than calm, resentment. We want compassion, but we get resentment. How can you can't have both? You can't have fear and courage at the same time. You know, you can't have love and harming at the same time. You see why people say their best thinking got them here? That's, a good way to look at it. Like the social instinct is our interaction I mentioned with other people. So our goal is if they're used correctly, it's companionship. That's why a sense of fellowship and togetherness with others is one of the reasons, that's why people get married and, make friends. But the social instinct is misused. Like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, the opposite happens. We think we're better than others and we worry about what people think of us. We want to be recognized. Basically, we resent others and push people out of our lives. So, and many times we harm others because we're living on this self-propulsion. And Howard, do you want to comment on that self-propulsion? Oh, you're muted.
No, I want to wait till we get through this paragraph and
Okay,
talk a
that's
little bit
fine.
about it. And I want you to go through your stage stuff.
So each person, it says in here, each person is like an actor. So this is interesting because he uses this actor analogy a few times in the book. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show. It's forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet. I'm sorry. The, it's forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of its players in its own way. So the question I have is, what does an actor do? They play a part that's assigned to them. They're playing a character actor, right? They prepare a role by following a script. And there's a different name for the person who runs the show and, who arranges the scenery and, the actors. That person's called the director. He's the one that's control. And the problem with their actor here, he also believes in his head he's the director, meaning he believes he's in control. And now if there's now if there's a director and an actor who I mean that if you have a director and an actor who he thinks he's a director, do you think he might butt heads with some people, instincts in collision? Let's see. Here's how much control he wants. If his arrangements only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show
Mhm.
would be great. So
Mhm.
our actor lives in this delusion that if everything stays right, if people do, as he wants, this is going to be fantastic. But I think he's going to he's going to hit that wall. It doesn't work that way, you know, and that's because, like I said a minute ago, for many happenings are determined by what others, think, we should do to get the right, expectations. If, if that fails, we don't get the correct expectations from people, or we get resentment, and we got high self-esteem and pride. Let's look at our friends in sane logic.
Steve,
Everyone, oh, go ahead.
yeah, I just wanted to add something. Steve was talking about different positions. I came in here thinking I'm number one, thinking I'm the director, when at best I'm number two, that God is the director. And we're about to run into those terms on the next page. But I had things reversed. I come in thinking I'm number one and I'm really number two. And I've got a suggestion for you. We just read a sentence, and let me reread it again. It says, if his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. I challenge you. Do you find yourself slipping into that role in everyday life? Maybe as a parent, maybe as a sponsor, maybe as a spouse. How about as a home group member? You've been to a business meeting lately and run into a collision of instincts? If only everybody in this business meeting would do as I say, everything would be great. Why are they fighting with me? Do you find yourself slipping into that? Well, if you do, we're still in the position thinking we're number one when we're actually number two. I'll let you take it from there, Steve.
So, you know, um, so everybody, including himself, will be pleased. Life will be wonderful. So if he's happy, everyone will be happy. That works out good. And trying, notice it says the word trying means attempting. And attempting to make these arrangements, our actor may be sometimes quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he is likely to have varied traits. Another word for trait is character, right? The actor, different characters, character actor, like I mentioned. And how many characters, did you play? Like, how many masks did you wear? The character I played, or the mask I wore, was when I met someone, I went on my way to be kind, considerate, modest, and self-sacrificing. That was the part of my facade, my hustle. But as soon as you got to know me, they would see that I was mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. What drove me to be kind, considerate, modest, even self-sacrificing was my social security instinct. I wasn't a good person. I wasn't a nice person. I wanted something from you, and I wanted you to trust me. So I was the hustle. And when I didn't get what I want, you could see right away that I would be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. Made a lot of enemies. But I was not aware of that because I was blinded by instincts. So I was aware that I was kind of considered self-sacrifice. I was not aware of that I was mean, egotistical, dishonest, you know. Um, yeah. So, Howard, do you want to comment the rest of that paragraph before we go to the next one? Or?
Yeah, do you want me to finish reading it?
Was that the rest of it there? The
Where did you finish? I thought you finished with life would be wonderful.
Oh no, I said most likely to have varied traits. And
Oh, okay. That's fine. Um, Basically, we're talking about delusional behavior. Life will be wonderful if only people would do as I think is right. Um, but I want to talk about one of the things that we're going to be talking about here is self-will versus God's will, which brings us to a question that very often gets posed at meetings, and I want to try and answer it for you today. And that question is, how do I know what God's will is for me? And you'll get the answer very often is, well, just do the next right thing, right? How many of you have heard that or thought that if just do the next right thing, right? But how do I know what the next right thing is? As far as I'm concerned, my decision-making process is faulty. It's defective. So if I make a decision and I think this is the best thing, it's probably going to be wrong. And we're about to run into a couple of things that are going to tell us, how do I know? How do I know what God's will is for me? It's called discernment. There's a book called The Soul of Sponsorship. It's a collection of letters from Bill Wilson to Father Dowling, who was his sponsor, one of his sponsors. And one of the threads that run through all of these letters is discernment. Bill wanting to know, is this thing I'm about to do, is this God's will, or is it Bill Wilson trying to convince himself that it's God's will? In other words, how do I discern what is really God's will and what is my will? And there's a way to do that. But I'm going to wait till we finish the rest of this page to answer that question of being, how do I know what God's will is for me? So you're going to have to hang around a little while longer before we get to it. So go ahead, Steve.
All right. So let's see what happens. What usually happens is the show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think others don't treat him right. And that's where we say, does anyone else, everyone else gets all the breaks and everything happens to me. The low self-esteem. The end result is through this behavior, we become a victim.
Poor me. Poor
Right.
me.
Right. And we're innocent victims of wrongdoings of others. Blame. Uh, One thing my grand sponsor used to hammer home is he'd always say, there's no recovering in being a victim. There's zero recovery. And but let's see how our friends does with this victim mindset. But just like any alcoholic, he decides to exert himself more. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the play, life doesn't suit him right. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure other people are to blame. He becomes angry, indignant self-pity. I mean, like again, how could they do this to me? Angry at them, and then self-pity, angry at ourselves. Why does this stuff always happen to me? So now he's resentful, meaning his instincts are hurt or threatened. So when my instincts are hurt or threatened, I have a resentment. When I satisfy my instincts, I'm harming someone, right? Now he needs to satisfy those instincts. That's why here comes the harm. What is our basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? So selfishness is tending mostly to my own needs with little or no thought of others. tending mostly to my own stuff, tending mostly to Steve. Self-seeking is pursuing my needs. Action. Remember, selfish is up in my head. Self-seeking is, so if I get resentment against Howard and he doesn't even know it, and I go up and start yelling at him and calling everything in the book, well, now I'm self-seeking. I've harmed him. So I'm going to satisfy my instincts by harming him. I was so driven by instincts I harm others, even, you know, even even when when I was trying to be kind. So if you look at that sentence, am I not really harming others even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim? The delusion is anything. If something's deluded, it's insane, right? Is he not a victim of the delusion, the insanity that he can wrest satisfaction, happiness out of his life if he only manages well? Howard, do you want to comment on that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
The way you looked up, I could tell.
Oh yeah. Uh, let's go through this again. He begins to think life doesn't treat him well. First of all, when one of us begins to think, right away, you know that it's not going to come out well. Thinking is not our strong suit. So what happens? We begin to think, and here's what we think: that the life isn't treating me well. Poor me. When I begin to think because things aren't going my way, it's your fault. That's how my thinking runs. So I have to change my approach. I can be kind if it'll get what I want. I can be mean. I can be gracious, and still the play doesn't suit me, right? So what happens? I'll try something else. I'll eat humble pie, right? I'll play the victim here. So I'll admit that I may be somewhat at fault, but I'm sure that other people are more to blame. What's the difference? You ever wonder what the difference between being at fault and being at blame are? Well, I believe that being at fault means you've committed a slight crime or offense. I'm at fault. I've committed some small offense. Blame means I'm responsible for the wrong, period. I am entirely responsible. So I eat crow a little bit. I say, all right, I may be a little bit guilty of this thing, but I'm not responsible for the whole problem. That's the other person. So what happens? I get angry, I get indignant, I get self-pity. And as Steve said, what's the basic trouble? Is he not a self-seeker, even when he's trying to be kind? You want me to finish up the paragraph?
Sure.
Is he not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? Incidentally, if you notice, there's a lot of use of the word self between page 60 and this page 62. It's used 22 times. 22 times in those 2 pages, the word self comes up. But is he not a victim of the delusion? And as Steve mentioned, delusion means insanity. Delusion is defined as seeing but convincing oneself of something that's not true, belief in a lie. That's insanity. That he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only he manages well. To wrest something means to take it with force. So I'm convinced that I can get what I want if I just manage well, if I just exert more control and more control. Is it not evident to all the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate? Remember the formula we said before? We step on the toes of those around us, those we're in conflict with, and they retaliate. They push back. They retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show.
Howard, can I say something really quick?
Absolutely.
I want to cross reference backwards to the 12 and 12 really quick, about instincts and collision. It's on page 80 of the 12 and 12. Um, page 80, 12 and 12. We might ask ourselves what we mean when we say we have harmed other people. What kind of harms do people do to one another anyway? To define the word harm in a practical way, we might call a result of instincts in collision, which cause physical, mental, and emotional or spiritual damage to people. If our tempers are constantly bad, we arouse anger in others. If we lie or cheat, we deprive others not only of their worldly goods, but of their emotional security and peace of mind. We really issue them an invitation to become contentious and vengeful. If our sex conduct is selfish, we may excite jealousy, misery, and a strong desire to retaliate in kind. And there's the instincts and collision. It's like the two rams ducking down and hitting each other, you know. And I mean, how's it going to end? Being directed by Mr. Instincts, Howard.
Yeah, that paragraph that you just read, I always get into when we talk about make a list of people we've harmed, because this
I,
describes subtle harms. We sometimes think of harms as big issues. You smashed a car, you hurt somebody, you did something physically to somebody. How about the subtle harm, which is just the way you behave around the people around you? In the next paragraph, he gets into a little bit more. He talks about being miserly, callous, cold, humorless, impatient, domineering. All of these attitudes we cast off on the family. Do they not create harms? Are they not instincts in collision? So I love the fact that you picked that out, Steve, because that is such an important part of the book. But you want me to finish this paragraph? Because we'll
yeah,
get into
go
it.
ahead.
This is important. So they wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show. I'm going to suggest you highlight the next sentence. The next sentence is so important. Is he not, even in his best moments? In other words, when my motives are good. That's my best moments, when my motives are good. That's what I tell myself, at least. When my motives are right, I make the best decisions when that's the case. So even in my best moments, when my motives are good, am I not a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Confusion, harmony. How do I know what God's will is for me? Let's take a look at this. When I'm undecided about doing something, I ask myself, is what I'm going to do going to produce confusion or harmony? If I produce confusion, I produce harmony, I think it's God's will, because God doesn't want me to create disharmony. He wants me to be a creator of harmony. If I create confusion, then it's not God's will. So in its simplest form, right here on page 61, we're being given a little hint as to how do I know what God's will is for me? Self-will versus God's will. If it's going to create harmony, it's probably God's will. If it's going to create confusion, it's probably self-will, and it's not what God wants me to do. And I'll take this a step further. If you're familiar with the Oxford Group, which is where we came from, the Oxford Group had these four principles. I'm sorry, had these four principles: honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. Can you see that? I just switched the screens, okay? So we ask ourselves, is it going to create one of those things? Is the action I'm thinking of taking consistent with being honest, pure, unselfish, and loving? If it is, it's probably God's will. If it isn't, it's probably not God's will. So I have another way to look at it. Is it going to create confusion or harmony, or is it going to create honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love? And I'll take it even a step further. The more work we do on this, the more spiritual principles we begin to live by. And I think we begin eventually to live by the principles of tolerance, compassion, patience, love, forgiveness, humility, and goodwill. And now we've opened up that question even more. Is what I'm considering doing going to be consistent with those spiritual principles? If it is, it's probably God's will, because I believe that's what God wants me to be: tolerant, compassionate, patient, loving, and so on. If it's not, if it's the opposite of those things, If it's a manifestation of self, I'm acting out of inconsideration or irresponsibility or dishonesty and so on. And if it's not, it's not God's will. So, how do I know what God's will is for me? You could choose any one of these things. Is it going to create harmony or confusion? Is it going to be in line with purity, honesty, unselfishness, and love, or violate those terms? Or is it going to be consistent with these seven spiritual principles we try and live by? Now, you can take an action and violate one of those principles because we're not perfect. The question is, how much compromise can you put into your life before it starts to eat away at the serenity and the peace that you've established as a result of the working through these steps? You start to unwind. And one of the ways we notice we're unwinding is the first thing on page 52, which is we are starting to have difficulty with human relationships. We're having difficulty with our relationships. All of a sudden, everybody, I got a problem with everybody and everything. He's doing this and he's doing that. That's how I know I'm starting to unwind, that I'm making too many decisions that are not consistent with God's will, and I'm starting to fall apart. Meaning, I'm going back to self will. I'm running my life on self will, which, as we already seen, is a collision of instincts. I'll leave it at that for now, Steve.
It kind of reminds me of, and I don't want to go to that part of the book yet, but it's, I think it's 73 where he talks about living double life in the stage character, and you're the actor, and we're the one he wants us to see, and, but he wants a reputation, knows his heart doesn't deserve it, and then the things he does in his sprees, he vaguely remembers, and what does he do with those memories? All the anger, he shoves them far inside of himself as fast as he can, and that they'll never see the light of day, causes more fear. And so, where's God? 55 mentioned that God's within us. And if we're shoving these emotions, these memories inside of ourselves, I look at like this is we've always had this beautiful temple inside of us, but what do? We store our worst memories inside there. Where the light is, we make dark. You know, Harmony's blocked. And that's why the awakening happens. That's why people have experiences. So we're back on 61. Our actor is self-centered. Really? Egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. He is like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining over the sad state of the nation. The minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century. Politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. I hear this stuff all the time still. The outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who is locked up, who's lost all and is locked up. Whatever, I love this right here, whatever our prostrations, are not most of us concerned with our resentments, with ourselves, our resentments and our self-pity. So at the end of the day, when you're driven by instincts, you put your head down in your bed, our best thinking concern with ourselves, resentments, and our self-pity. That's why my sponsor asked me in the fifth step, he said, do you want to be right or do you want to be free? Why do you have to get the last word in? That type of stuff. So now I get to one of my favorite paragraphs in this book. Howard, do you want to comment on that paragraph I just went through? Or?
Well, yeah, just, one thing. When I suggested using that as a barometer for God's will and self-will, I think in time, that I need to stop using God as a kind of warning light to tell me, that's not what my will would be for you. We got to stop using God as a warning light and begin to use him as a guiding light to tell me what the right thing to do is all the time, to not worry about doing the wrong thing, just guide myself by the principles that I believe God wants me to live by. So let's use them less as a warning light and more as a guiding light. And that's the only point I wanted to make. That's all.
And as far as I know it, the only time is in the big book, I might be wrong, where ego is mentioned, egocentric it says, is in this page. Um, and ego is the I factor. I'm better than you. I know more than you. But most of all, it lives in duality, right? And duality means separation. I want to be separated from people. I'm separated from myself, and then I believe I'm separated from God. So if a person's lives in duality, look at this guy. He's complaining over the sad state of the nation. I mean, he's probably arguing with somebody. He's separating himself. The ministry who sides of the sins of the 20th century, separation. Politician reformers who would think all would be utopia if the rest of the world behaved better. There's separation. The outlaw say cracking the society has wronged him. Separation. And the alcoholic who's lost all, same thing. Because they're concerned mostly with their resentments and their self-pity. So look at the next paragraph. Selfish and
Well,
self-centered. Oh, go ahead,
hang
Howard.
on, Steve. Yeah, I just want to add something to what you just read. I'm going to suggest, I had a lot of difficulty when I first read this. What is he talking about? The businessman lolling in the sun, the what is this shit? Well, if I add a few words, it becomes a little bit more clear to me. So I'm going to suggest this. He's like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, doing nothing, right? Lolling in the sunshine, doing nothing. Complaining of the sad state of the nation, the minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century but does nothing. Again, paying lip service, and doing nothing. Politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. In other words, if the rest of the world would only do as I say. Because Lord knows I know what's best for the rest of the world because I've been such a success in my life, right? It's the same thing. And then, as Steve pointed out, that the safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, the victim, the alcoholic who's lost all and is locked up, the victim. Whatever our protestations are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, our self pity, self, self, self. There you go.
All right. So, self-centeredness that we think is the root of our troubles. So I mentioned, selfishness was tending mostly, to my own needs, little or no thought of others. And selfishness is kind of the same thing. It's concerned primarily with the one's own interest and well-being. But selfishness is something you'll never fully be aware of until you get into the step. I mean the action steps. Um, it's time to turn our thinking and our actions over to something other than us, which is a big thing. I mean, but the word root is the origin, the source, a cause of something. So it comes from a Latin word which means starting point. The starting point is where something begins, of course. Starting point is whether that's a tree or the root of our problem. So I'm going to put up a slide. All right. So, um, so it's obviously it's a tree, but that's only what we see on the surface. What's underground tells its story, right? Um, and you notice that the roots are bigger than the tree. That that is, usually the case. Now let's look at from a different perspective. What everybody sees, on the surface is the tree again, alcohol. They see that on our surface. It's when people look at us, they see the surface alcoholic or addict. But the truth is, it's just a symptom of our problem. A symptom is an indicator to a disease or disorder. Again, it's what's underneath that that tells our story. The root of our troubles. We decide to eliminate alcohol, and all of a sudden, boom, we enter AA and looking like this, all the roots, you got your instincts, yourself, social security, sex, But look how all of them go out the different directions. They all go to exactly where they created low self-esteem, fear. It's all there. And look at the very bottom one, obsession. That goes everywhere. It's the main root. Restless, irritable, dishonesty, frightened, resentment. It's a lot of stuff. But what happens to most people is they eliminate the tree because we entered AA. I'm going to AA. I'm not an alcoholic anymore, they think. But this is, and they're sitting there with this stuff in their head. They're sitting there with personal relation issues, low self-esteem, jealousy, harm, loneliness, inconsiderate, guilt, revenge. You say the wrong thing, you sneeze wrong in a meeting, and someone wants to, looks at you like you're crazy. It's no wonder why we drink. How many times when you drank, you pass out at night and you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning? It's like your brain was on their bedpost and jumped on your head and said, this is going to be the day you're looking at because all this stuff. And you can't, all of a sudden you're wide awake. So I used to drink more. But if you don't eliminate the root, they will always grow back. That's the thing. They will always grow back. Root and branch. If I have someone come over and trim the weeds in my yard, and I say my weeds are 3 feet tall, right? And he uses a weed whacker, what's going to happen? I'm going to have the same problem year after year. You have to get to the root, you know, you know. But if you look at it one more time, the tree can always grow back. There's no other way to eliminate all this stuff other than the steps. That's how deep as it goes. I mean, what helps me explain that is because I was that guy sitting there with the roots. Look what it says in the book now. We have a powerful word. One of my favorite words I mention here is driven. Driven. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows. And they retaliate, but I'm going to blame them. Instincts in collision. Driven means strongly controlled and propelled like the boat, forcibly. But we're driven by 100 forms of fear. Fear is this basic survival mechanism we mentioned that motivates these instincts. But, it's going to lead me to wonderful feelings of anxiety, tension, and constant distress. 100, not one form of self-delusion, 100 forms. And that's a simple, insane belief that we hold despite evidence to the contrary. Believing something isn't true, illusion. And then there's self-seeking, that's our action pursuing our own needs, harming people, 100 forms of it. And self-pity, when there's no one out left to resent, who do we wind up resenting? The deep sorrow and depression of resenting ourselves. We step on the toes of our fellows and retaliate. Would you say there's a pretty good chance that you might step on a few toes out there and harm others? How many toes you step on? Howard?
Yeah, absolutely. Driven, if I'm being driven, I'm not in charge. Mark Houston has a great story. He talks about he comes down from his room in his hotel and he's greeted by a chauffeur in front of the hotel and he says, Mr. Houston, my name is Fear. I'm going to be driving you around all day today. And the next day he comes down from his hotel room and there's another driver there and he says, Mr. Houston, my name is Dishonesty, and I'm going to be driving you around all day today. And that's what it's like. We're being driven, we're being compelled, we're being fed like the roots of that tree. Think of the roots as the defects and the tree as our ism. We're feeding our dis-ease, our alcoholism, with all of those defective thoughts. That's what's driving us. That's what's keeping us going. And as I mentioned before, Steve just read a part of this whole formula that I mentioned before about we're running our life on self-will, these self-centered thoughts. We are in collision. We're in conflict with people because the problem with self-will is everyone's got us. I got it. That causes them to push back. We collide with those forces and they push back. When they push back, we get angry, we get resentful, we wind up drinking and drugging. So it's all leading to this. But I'll wrap it up with this one statement. We just read, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, blah, blah, blah. Fear and self. That's right now, that's the way we're identifying these defects. In 2 pages, Bill's going to tell us we have to get down to causes and conditions. And so we're going to get into the fourth step, which allows us to give names to each of these forms of fear, forms of self. What do they look like? Because right now it's very abstract. It says we're driven by 100 forms of fear and self. Well, what is that in English? What does that mean? We're going to do this inventory and we're going to give a name to those things. And the names are things like frightened, irresponsible, inconsiderate, dishonest, selfish, self-seeking, judgmental. Those are the manifestations of self that feed the tree, that feed our ism. But we haven't given them names yet. We just know them as a form of fear and a form of self. So keep that in mind as we go ahead into the inventory, that we're looking to assign names to all of those fears, to all of those thoughts, those self and fear, of self and fear. That's
So
it.
he wraps up this paragraph. Sometimes they hurt us. Sometimes seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that sometime in the past we made decisions based on self, based on instincts, based on pride, based on self-esteem, whatever you want to say there, emotions. Made decisions based on self, which later place us, underline my sponsor maybe underline us, that later place us in a position.
INST.
So, that's what there's when they say self, start thinking those instincts, pride, self-esteem, personal relations, sex, whatever. Maybe it's all of them, place us in a position to be hurt. As much as we walked into AA and I'm gonna tell this guy in my fist up how I've been screwed over so long. That's not the way it works. You know, this is it's deep. I
Steve,
think we'll,
I could, let's,
yeah, go ahead.
there's a story. This last part, we've made decisions based on self, which place us in a position to be hurt. I was at a meeting and a guy was talking about his he was running, how do I describe it? He was running an after hours pharmaceutical exchange program. Okay. And he got into an accident. He was driving at 2 in the morning and some guy blew a stop sign and T-boned him, totaled out his car, totaled out his own car as well. And the guy found out that the guy who hit him was an illegal immigrant, certainly had no driver's license and had no insurance. So he set out to make that guy's life as miserable as he could make it, to get him sent back to wherever he came from, to get every charge thrown at him that he possibly could. And when he explained that story, his sponsor said to him, wait a minute, wait. What exactly were you doing at that intersection at 2 in the morning? You were dealing drugs. You are placing yourself in a position to be hurt. And that's what this is telling us. We've made decisions based on self. I'm going to deal drugs. I'm going to go out at 2 in the morning. And it put me in a position to be hurt. This guy ran the stop sign and totaled my car. Is it his fault or is it my fault based on self that put me in that intersection at that moment? Just the way to make it graphic. That's it. See you next week.
Well, one thing is I like to do because I wave rolls in it, but I'm just gonna read the first sentence of the next paragraph because when I read this the first time, it pissed me off. So our troubles we think are
Oh,
basically of our own making.
I don't like that.
When I read that, my sponsor looked at me and he says, "Does that make you happy?" He goes, "That's hope." He goes, "That's hope." that our troubles are basically of our own making. So we'll get more into that next week. We'll describe what we're talking about there. I'm going to
Absolutely.
stop
Absolutely.
the recording. Oops, hold on.